Hi everyone, welcome to California Rebel Base. Great to be with you again. Kristen is here and we have a fantastic guest today who's going to explain something that I get asked all the time when we're talking about what's going on in California right now, and that is the recall mechanics. What exactly is happening with the recall? Where are we in the process? What happens next? To help us understand all of that, we have Katy Grimes with us, who is the editor of California Globe and an investigative journalist. Welcome, Katy. Great to see you today.
Thank you, Steve. Hi, Kristen.
Hi.
So, Katy, just before we get started, tell us a little bit about California Globe. I only recently came across it. I'm finding it already a fantastic resource. I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about what you're doing there and how it's been growing and what you hope to be doing in the future as we cover this recall.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you found us. What we're doing at California Globe is filling that huge void that is at the state capitol. We're the only non-mainstream media, credentialed media allowed into the Capitol. And what we're trying to do is make sure we report on the stories that the mainstream ignore or they play down or they don't tell the truth about. And so that's why we are really growing. I think people are desperate for truth about what's really happening in California politics.
So when you say the mainstream, do you mean, I mean, often that term is code for, you hear that from conservatives talking about the liberal bias as they see it in the media. Is that how do you see it as a sort of ideological thing?
Some of it, definitely. I'm talking about, the traditional news sources that cover the state capitol, the Sacramento Bee, Los Angeles Times, San Francisco Chronicle, as well as television stations up and down the state. And it is stunning. I've been doing this a long time, and it is stunning to see what they turn their backs on. And that's what we pick up and report on.
Well, I hope we can get into that. Kristen, yeah.
I was just going to say, I scrolled through the Twitter feed. Everybody knows I'm partial to Twitter. And there were a bunch of stories, Katy, I'd never even heard about. And I was outraged on almost every one that I read. Everybody knows, for example, the reservoirs are a problem. But this article that I think you wrote about 90% of our water just going straight out into the ocean.
Yes.
It's things like that. I cannot believe it's not more widely reported. And so it really does seem to me like you guys are covering stuff that Californians must know. And it's really disturbing that we don't see it anywhere. So thank God for, California Globe.
Well, thank you. And that's exactly what we're trying to do is make sure you get the whole story.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that, we're trying to do here, I've said this before as a kind of trying to capture what this show is all about, is trying to find out what's going wrong in California and how to put it right. And often those things actually aren't ideological. It's
Correct.
Just really bad governance. It's incompetence or bad governance of one kind or another. And one of the things I've said before, I think it's so true, is a lot of that has arisen and built and metastasized over the years because of a lack of scrutiny.
Yes.
And where there's no scrutiny, there's no accountability. So the poor decision making, the poor governments, that's just going to go on because there's no accountability for it if no one knows about it.
That is spot on. And that's exactly what we're trying to do, is not just get the truth out there, but help people analyze what it means, what's going on, how this impacts you, why 90% of our water going out to the ocean because our reservoirs are being drained, what that means for everybody. And frankly, what that means is this summer we're going to have significant water shortages.
Let's just look at that before we get into the recall, which is the main reason I thought it'd be interesting for you to join us. Thanks for raising it, Kristen. It's a really interesting, I haven't read the story myself. Katy, tell us what exactly is going on there.
Well, there's this misnomer that agriculture uses 40% or 50% of the water in the state, and that's absolutely incorrect. What happens is the first 50% of California's water, snow melt, et cetera, goes straight out to the ocean. And that is based on an old judge's decision on environmental policy. It's to make sure that the salmon have plenty of cold water in which to spawn. And it also is based on some delta smelt issues, of which there have only been like 4 counted in the last 3 years. That aside, the remaining 50%, only 10% of the water used is by urban users. The remaining 40% goes to farmers, ranchers, et cetera, agriculture. So this this idea that we have to ration our water use in the summertime is a joke. It won't make an impact at all. What we need is that other 50%, or at least half of that water, that would prevent us from having these, this water rationing that we're facing. And
go on.
It's all political. It's government. It's a government created water shortage. We have reservoirs that should be full to the top right now, but they're draining them.
That's amazing. Honestly, that is amazing. I mean, we see, we walk around, we go on hikes, we spend a lot of time in nature around us, up in the Sierras, all over the place. And you see these reservoirs and it's really sad. And you see that kind of rim, like the dirty bathtub analogy, and it's so low. Every time we walk past, with friends or family, you talk about it and you say, oh, it's so sad. Look at that. That's the drought. That's the climate. You're saying that it's not the climate, it's not the drought, it is deliberate policy to drain the reservoirs.
Yes, and it's radical environmental policy. If you look at every member on the State Water Resources Control Board, they all are radical environmentalists. Some have just come from other radical agencies like the Air Resources Board. They jump over to the Water Resources Control Board. And it's been like this for a long time.
And people don't know.
No.
And I don't think the majority of people have any idea. And instead they're, turning on their neighbors, and it's all a distraction technique. Did you flush? Did you take a shower today? You're such a terrible person. Oh my gosh, your lawn is not brown.
Right.
Brown lawns are now some sort of statement that I believe in the environment or I don't. And it's just a complete look the other way technique from these disastrous policies.
Yeah. It's a really stunning.
It's horrible. I would say, a nice sort of headline is, droughts, yes, are caused by Mother Nature, but water shortages are clearly in California caused by politicians.
That's exactly correct.
Yeah. So people need to start paying attention to this.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way of putting it. I was just about to ask. So you're not saying there's no drought. People can say this year, we had less rainfalls and less snowfall, as you say, because it's really the snow melt in the Sierra snowpack that is important in terms of water supply. Yes, this was a year where we had less of that, whatever percentage. I don't know have the facts right here. But regardless of that, you're saying there's no need for a water shortage.
No. 2 years ago, we were 200% of our water kind of the average. And that water should have just been stored in the reservoirs and then used as needed. We would have had plenty of water for our agricultural needs.
So the smell, I'm sorry, I really do want to understand this because it's so interesting and it's such a big issue. And as we move into the summer, it's going to be bigger and it's going to be conflated with the politics around the wildfires and so on. It's going to be all together in one kind of mess. And of course, the narrative that we hear overwhelmingly is, this is what climate change does, and this is why we all need to move to electric cars or whatever. That's where this goes. But I just want to understand about this 50% that is released into the ocean. You're saying that's for, when you say environmental reasons, you mean conservation of protecting fish?
Yes,
not stocks, but species. Is that right?
Specifically, the Chinook salmon. We're spending 50% of our water for the Chinook salmon to the ocean.
And for 1,000 of them, right?
You got it,
Katie.
Yeah.
I'd understood that, and just again, I've sort of vaguely seen this. I know it's been a very controversial issue over the years. That this was primarily around the Sacramento River and the Delta. Is that right? This whole issue with this.
That's the Delta smelt issue.
Okay. So I'm muddling up to. Could you just lay it all out? It's really interesting because it sounds like it's a small thing, but of course it's having this huge impact.
Yes, and it's a constant fight. And frankly, it's not even that ideological, except for the radical environmentalist policies, because there's a lot of conservationists and environmentalists that want to try to save the Delta. So, we need water in the Delta, obviously. And apparently there's an issue also with some salt water invading into the Delta. And that's a problem also. The idea that the Delta smelt somehow got special federal protection is unbelievable. It's not an indigenous fish to the area. And this is what's preventing all kinds of farmers and agriculture throughout the Delta and downward into the Central Valley from getting the water that they need. And again, as I said, there were 4 Delta smelts caught in the last 3 years. That's all they could find in their testing of it.
So how does it, let's look at it from their point of view, the people making these decisions. How, in theory, does it help protect the Delta smelt?
It doesn't.
To release all this water? What would they say? There must be a reason for it.
Well, they've tried to say that the fish needed this water to keep invasive species out. Nobody ever really knew what they were talking about. But they've proven time and time again that by sending all this water out to the ocean via the Delta, it hasn't saved the Delta smelt. And so they're silent on that.
So it is a Northern California thing. This is like 50%. Yes. Did you say it's 50% of the state's water total that's flushed out?
Yes, because it was a federal judge that originally ordered this. So
and most of the water is, and is it correct to say most of the state's water supply comes from the Sierras through the kind of irrigation networks and river networks in the northern part of the state, and then it's sent down south. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, that's good.
Oh my gosh.
And I think the idea was for the fish to have sort of free passage.
Correct.
That they need to be able to get from the north out somewhere. And so that's why you needed to have the water flow out to the ocean to benefit these fish. But, as I understand your article, Katie, it was saying, look, at the best case scenario, it was only going to save 1,000 fish. Right. Turns out they've only saved 4.
Of the Delta smelt. What about the salmon issue?
Well,
I never thought we were going to get so into fish.
I know. What's crazy is the recall is going to happen during the drought. We're going to be feeling the pain of the wildfires and the drought. And so this is actually a super relevant issue of let's look at why we're all suffering so much from these water policies. It's not the drought. It's a great issue to talk about during the recall because it's such an example of failed policy. Yeah. And paying lip service to something we all agree on. We don't want to kill smelt. We don't want to kill salmon. I mean, you can align the whole state around that.
Exactly. So I just want to make sure we've really understood it. So with the smelt, we've talked about that, which is the aim is to flush out the salt water, protect the smelt in the Delta, but actually that hasn't worked and there's hardly any left anyway. What about the salmon? What's the story there? What do they think they're doing with these policies in order to protect them? What's the rationale? Well,
it's the same rationale. It's man intervening or thinking we're intervening to help the fish when really what we've done has done nothing of the sort. Throughout California's millennia, there were salmon, big years and bad years. And they've been on the brink of extinction and they've come back, whether we were here or not. I really think that this is being used as an excuse to send our water out to the ocean.
But why do the salmon need it? I mean,
they can't tell you why. It's cold water. They're blaming it on temperatures. If we don't send all this fresh Sierra water, down our rivers out to the ocean, the salmon die or they can't spawn because
they can't go upriver to spawn. Right. So it's the temperature. They need the cold flowing water.
Yes.
My gosh. Okay. And you think, and what's your 50% figure based on? That 50% of the reservoir water is flushed out. Where do you get that?
Oh, it's actually in California, the California State Department of Water Resources, as well as the federal water. I'm trying to remember who it is, the Bureau of Reclamation, and I've linked to it in all of my stories. I'm not making it up. That's why I'm linking to it.
Amazing. Right. And final question, and then we'll move on to maybe not final. Let's just, there's always more questions for this stuff. What can we do about it? I always try and think, okay, this is terrible. How do we fix it? The governance here, who's making that, who's in charge of that 50% decision?
This is the State Water Resources Control Board that are appointees. So it's very political. If these people were elected or if they were government bureaucrats, we probably would have more say with them, but they're appointees. And most of these are former Governor Jerry Brown appointees. Governor Newsom has, I think, appointed a couple as well now.
So they're appointed by the governor. Yes. Is there any oversight from the legislature in those appointments?
The legislature has abdicated its oversight responsibilities with numerous state agencies, including the Water Resources Board and the Air Resources Board.
Does that abdicate mean they don't hold hearings or they just rubber stamp it, or
They rubber stamp it. Sometimes they'll pretend to hold hearings, but these two agencies are clearly making law every day. And
how many people on? How big are these boards?
They're not that big. We might talk 7 or 8 on the Water Resources Control Board. I think the Air Resources Board's a little larger. But again, we're not talking massive boards with diverse opinions.
And you made earlier. You talked about a judge making a decision around this.
Yeah, this goes back to a federal judge, and I'm trying to maybe the late 80s or early 90s. I forget now, but I can get you that information if you want to.
But what was the decision? How did it get to, why was it in front of a judge? What was the
And that's what
story?
was so confusing. It was environmentalists suing and suing and suing, claiming we were wasting state water by sending it to agriculture and allowing urban use. And their objection was, the more water that's available, the more suburban neighborhoods that would be built, the more you can hear where they're going. And they brought a lawsuit, and somehow they actually got this judge to side with them, that the salmon needed the water more than the people and agriculture.
Amazing story. That's just, if there's one fact that everyone, as we have these heated debates, as Kristen said, we're bound to have over the summer, 50% of our reservoir water is being flushed out to the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep, we're keeping the reservoir levels artificially low.
Correct.
Amazing.
On purpose.
Absolutely
it's
amazing.
Intentional policy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there you are. So thank you for bringing that up, Kristen. I'm so glad you did. I didn't know any of that. I sort of vaguely heard
Thank you, Katy, for writing about
exactly,
it.
of course, Katy, and
Thanks
of course
for
for digging into it. And like I said, I'd heard about you hear about these debates. You sort of vaguely read about the salmon and the smelt and the delta smelt and whatever, but I had no idea that it had such a big impact on what's going on. So let's talk about what we were going to talk about. This may have proved to be much more interesting. But I do think it's interesting to look at what happens now in terms of the recall, because for those of us who follow it closely, we sort of have a pretty clear idea, but a lot of people aren't following it closely. And I'd love to hear from you a kind of clear explanation of what happens, assuming very little knowledge on the part of people listening as to what happens next.
Well, this is the, I think, 5th or 6th recall attempt of Governor Newsom, but this one's sticking to the wall thus far. What was so interesting is over 2 million signatures were submitted. Of those, 1.7 million were validated. And all we needed was 1.495. So we've got a kind of I'll say a flexibility, if you will, of 224,000 signatures hanging out there. And I'll tell you that for a reason, because, and actually I'll get to that next. So what Governor Newsom's is being recalled over, I think most people who are honest can agree on his immigrant and immigration policy, his climate change policies. I don't think he can give a speech without mentioning, extreme weather and climate change. Then the COVID lockdowns and business shutdowns and school lockdowns and, that 15-month nightmare. And it wasn't just the French Laundry debacle, but that certainly played into it because I think it rubbed everybody's face in it. The propagandist media, and I'm not going to withhold right now and tell you these are propagandists. The LA Times actually said that the recall effort was spearheaded by supporters of former President Trump and the far right-wing extremist groups in the state. And really, nothing could be further from the truth. I think it's obvious there's plenty of Republicans, more than others, who have signed the recall petition. But the recall creators did a sampling before they'd even turned in the signatures of 20,000 just randomly sampled signatures and found that a third of those were Democrats and some were no party preference. So I think that's pretty significant that, these are crossover issues. They aren't ideological. And I think that's why the recall was sticking to the wall. There will be 2 questions on the ballot. It's really simple. Do you want to recall Governor Newsom is the first question. The second is, if Governor Newsom is recalled, which candidate do you want to replace him? Right now, there are 50 candidates already.
50 already?
50,
wow.
Yeah. The obvious ones we know because they've been in the news.
Yeah.
Caitlyn Jenner, Doug Osee, Kevin Faulconer, John Cox, Major Williams, I think are the most notable at this point. There are a couple porn stars on the back.
They run every time.
You got to have the porn stars. Yeah. What is a recall without porn stars?
Exactly. What is so interesting about this recall that separates it from the 2003 recall is that recall of Governor Gray Davis around some pretty similar issues, rolling blackouts, electricity shortages, DMV fees, things like that. The petitions were gathered, signatures qualified, and boom, we had a recall election. This time it's being dragged out because of some 2017 legislation that changed recalls in California.
Okay.
So right now we're in a 30-day period where the Secretary of State has the ability to contact signers of the recall petition and ask, did you mean to sign this? Did you know what you were signing? Are you sure you want to keep your signature on this? And I don't think this has ever been done in the state of California.
So that's a new requirement that was added in 2017. Yes, it is. Is it a requirement or an option? I mean, does the Secretary of State have?
It was in the legislation that was signed into law. And
she's recently appointed.
Yes, she is.
What's her? Can't remember her name.
Weber.
Shirley Weber.
There you go. So she's now actively doing this. Is there transparency around this? Is that happening? What do we know about it?
I don't think there's a lot of transparency around it. What she's doing is probably, I believe it's going like to the counties for them to contact people. But I think it's got a real chilling effect. Because imagine if you got a phone call from somebody in the county you don't know, you've never had any contact with, and they ask you, hey, we see that you signed the recall petition. Are you sure you want your signature to remain on this? I mean, this is outrageous.
I got a text. I can't believe you guys didn't get a text.
I didn't get a text.
I got a text. I'm on some special phone number.
Okay.
And it's totally nonsense. I'm just seeing if I can find it. But, it says basically this is being led by anti-vaxxers and pro-Trumpers.
Right. Wait, is that, Kristen, is that the official text from the
I think it is. I think it is because there's sort of two versions of it. And I didn't get the first version of it, which was worse. But I got the second version of it last week. And it basically says, you have an option. If you want to revoke your signature, you reply why. And then I think it prompts a phone call. Right. I wrote an essay as to why he should be called. So nobody called me. But that's what I think that they're doing is they're getting phone numbers and they're texting everybody and trying to figure out whether or not people answer yes or no.
But in the course of the contact, they're making political points.
Yes.
Yes. They're saying it's anti-vaxxer, pro-Trump Republicans leading this effort. Will you stand with the governor against these people? Yes or no?
Well, that's got to be a political message.
Yes.
That can't be from the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State is a government, that would be the outreach to the counties or whatever, in order to comply with the rule that you're describing, Katie, or the new provision.
But
that
I don't know
has to be an official thing.
The Secretary of State has to do it, right? I don't think Shirley Weber has to do it. What would prevent her from discharging it to volunteers? I mean, I don't know the rule well enough, but it seems to me that what they've said is we want citizen volunteers to go and help with this effort. So everybody's getting these texts. I've seen nothing from the Secretary of State. I've only seen these types of texts or phone calls.
Okay.
So
I see. So that's a campaign thing. I see. So what that means what that suggests is that they've got. I mean, Katie, are the names and contact details of everyone who signed the recall petition public information? Can they be purchased by a campaign and then used for campaigning purposes?
That much,
like you can buy the voter roll, right? You.
But as far as the signatures, I mean, people believe their signatures confidential on a petition, for a recall or for a ballot initiative. I think what's disturbing about this is we don't know enough about what extent the Secretary of State what she can do with this information. Did she just turn it over to the, no on the recall campaign people, or did this actually go through proper channels to county voter registrars? That's
worth looking into. Well, maybe you should look into that. I think that would be, and tell us, and we'll, tell everyone, because that what you're talking about there, Kristen, is very clearly a political
You're right.
message.
You're right.
So it sounds like what they've done is they've got hold of the details of all the signers, the No campaign or someone working with Gavin Newsom, and they've got that information. Now, maybe that's legitimate, maybe not. We need to know, did they pay for it? Like campaigns have to pay for some of this information. Anyway, they've got the information.
Yeah.
And now they're sending you a political message trying to push you off of your position. And then I suspect if you had pressed no or whatever, the right option, then they would send that to Shirley Weber, and then that would count towards dequalifying the ballot, dequalifying the recall. That sounds really dodgy. All of that sounds wrong to me.
It does. And Steve, what's so funny is I just assume everything's dodgy. So the second you said it's political, it occurred to me, wait a minute, the Secretary of State is actually supposed to be doing this very objective, nonpartisan job.
It's taxpayer money. She's funding. Exactly.
That's right. But to me, I had blended the two already because it's all, everybody's in bed with everybody.
That's really worth looking into.
Yes.
Okay. So we're in that period right now.
Yes.
Let's assume that they don't, so you said you got that cushion of whatever you said, 200,000 or so.
Yeah.
Let's say that that's enough and they don't find 300,000 people who want to take their names off. Mm-hmm. And so, and at that point, it's fine, officially qualified. There's no going back. It's 100% going to happen.
So after this 30-day period, which ends June 8th, the Secretary of State has 10 days to determine if there are still enough signatures. So this is another 10 days. She has a chance to count the withdrawals. Mm-hmm. And after that, the Department of Finance provides a cost estimate of the recall election, which I find almost hilarious because $31 billion in unemployment fraud, but they're worried about the cost of the recall. So the Department of Finance provides a cost estimate of the recall election to the governor, the lieutenant governor, the Secretary of State, and the Legislative Budget Committee. Mm-hmm. Then the Budget Committee has 30 days to review and comment on the estimate by the Department of Finance. And once that 30 days is up, the Secretary of State certifies the recall petitions to the governor and lieutenant governor, and then the lieutenant governor is required to call the recall election, which actually has to fall between 60 and 80 days after the certification of the signatures. So we're looking at October or November.
Wait, but you've got all these get-outs. So you've got the signature thing. We've talked about that. Mm-hmm. Then you've got the finance. Then you've got the financial estimate.
Yes. And
then you've got the legislature and all these other bodies reviewing that.
Right.
So what did you say? You had 10 days for the Secretary of State to do the signatures.
Yes.
Is there a after June the 8th? Is there a set period for the financial estimate? Was that another 10 days or was that longer?
They have 30 days.
For the legislature to consider it, but the actual finance
legislature has 30 days. The Department of Finance just provides a cost estimate. I don't think there's a time.
I see. But then can the legislature, in their 30-day consideration of the cost estimate, say, you know what, this is too expensive, we're not going to do it? Is that possible?
This is all new. This is the wild, wild west of recalls right now. I anticipate they will try to do that.
Because it was these are the 2017 updated rules.
Yes.
Can I just go back on that? Am I right in thinking they were put in place in response to an assembly member being recalled?
A state
down in Southern California, state senator, was it down in Southern California?
Newman, yes. And it was based on a bad vote he made on gas tax or water bill, I forget which. And he got targeted and he was recalled. And so this bill was first they tried to prevent his recall from happening. And that was too obvious. So he ended up getting recalled. Then this got, signed into law and made for any future recalls.
At any level?
Yes.
Statewide, yeah. Driven by Democrat. I mean, Josh Newman was a Democrat, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. And then the Secretary of State finally has this discretion over the exact date. But adding all that together, you think it's October or November. Do we have any planned elections this November? I mean, there's some local elections happening, aren't there? And some judicial, is that right?
I don't think there's anything statewide that I'm aware of. I think it's all local stuff.
Well, and I think they're going to try to play with this finance and budget piece.
Uh-huh.
So the governor actually asked the finance committee to get their budgets in by June 1st. I have no way for citizens to know whether or not they did that or not. Because I think he's trying to figure out some way to have more control over that date. If there's wildfires, push it out.
Right.
If we're in the midst of a drought, push it out. Right. He's really trying to game that window. And it reads to me like he can game the Department of Finance window. He can game the 30 days to review the budget window, because they can at any point go, okay, the budget is X, next.
Right.
And the only thing they can't game is the Secretary of State setting the election has to be 60 to 80 days out.
Correct.
So I think he's trying to get as much control as he can and get it to the Secretary of State sort of whenever he wants to do it, so that then he knows it's 60 days out from there.
The Lieutenant Governor, isn't it, the date?
Sorry, yeah. Is it the Lieutenant Governor, Katie? Who sets the date?
Well, let me see here. The lieutenant governor is required to call a recall election between 60 and 80 days after. So, I mean, they work with the Secretary of State on this.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the actual vote itself, it's all on one day, or it's one ballot, like, as you said, the two questions.
Yes.
And then the final part there is the specific rules, which is that whoever gets the most, if it is it 50% on question one, and any margin over 50, he is recalled.
Yes.
And then you move to question two.
Correct.
And then whoever gets the highest number, even if it's let's just say it's a very divided field, in theory, someone could win with 5%. Is that right?
Yes. It's kind of, as I said, it's the wild, wild west at that point.
And do we have you mentioned 50 candidates already. Are there any Democrats running?
Not yet. And that's another interesting aspect. The governor and his people have put out the word to Democrats in the state, don't jump into the recall. We want to keep this thing looking like it's a bunch of Trump supporters and right-wing extremists and anti-vaxxer moms running this. So I think that's an epic fail. Because at least in the last one, we had former Lieutenant Governor Cruz Bustamante as a Democrat choice. Until Schwarzenegger got in, and then that was that.
But why do you say it's a fail? Do you say it's a fail because it means that he's more likely to be recalled, or just a sign of weakness or lack of confidence on their part?
All of the above. I think I think it shows you that he isn't in this for the Democrat Party running the state. He's in it for him running the state.
Right.
Otherwise, party officials would say, we got to find our best backup candidate in order to keep control of the state. And I think it's a bad move, but don't tell anyone.
But why is that? Isn't it more likely to, their calculation would be, if all the candidates are Republicans, given that we have a big advantage in voter registration and so on, we assume that then more Democrats will be voting. It just means that Democrats are less likely to vote, less likely to switch, because as you made the point earlier, you've got actually, because of things like the lockdown and the school closures, you've got perhaps a surprising number of Democrats and independent voters, no party preference voters, as they're called in California, who are saying, yeah, we're open to this because we're so fed up with him. But actually, if there's no Democrat to vote for, would they actually vote to recall him? Isn't that actually quite smart strategy on their part?
I don't think so. I think there's enough people at this point who aren't going to forget the lockdown horrors. And as you pointed out, Kristen, we're about to enter probably a very, very bad wildfire season, water rationing, rolling blackouts, electricity shortages. I think that's not a Democrat or Republican issue. I think there's so many people in this state right now that are just very, very upset about the way things aren't working, the homeless epidemic, our roads, our schools, on and on and on. We could come up with a list of 20 very quickly that affect everybody, not just Republicans or not just Democrats. So I think that they're not offering Democrats an option just means we're probably going to get more votes for whoever the Republican is that wins.
I hope you're right. I'm worried.
I'm worried too.
He's Santa Claus, man. He's throwing out those checks. He's like, who needs I need a vote. I need a vote. Here's your $600. And I'm worried people are going to say, oh, he's not so bad. And he's so nice. And no matter what, he's already cute and he's got great hair. And COVID's over.
You don't need great hair to be successful.
How many times do people talk about that guy's hair? It's really weird, exactly. The obsession over his appearance. But I think he has this Kennedy-esque look, which he really does benefit from, which is such a commentary on society. But now he's giving out these checks. People think that the state is opening up. It's not. That's why I think he's going to try to pull up the vote so that you don't have the angry mom contingent like me, because, it's still going to be a very weird school year. And I think he wants that vote to be before this, we're in the throes of our kids not being in school again, right? We know they're going to be masked. All these lies are going to come to bear in the fall. And so I think he wants that advanced. And I really think right now it feels to me like the recall effort is losing momentum. It's terrible. I think he's worried, and that's why he's throwing out money.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I'm a little concerned. Yeah, I'm a little concerned. The people I talk to, they've sort of lost steam already. People don't want any more conflict. And I think people are kind of tired. And so the recall effort really needs to continue the momentum, or the checks are going to be the thing people decide on.
Katie, what do you think?
I think it's hit a plateau because the signatures were turned in, and now we're going through this new procedural process. I think that it will definitely pick up. I'm actually more concerned that the election even takes place. He still holds his emergency powers, which he is loath to give up. And I have a really sick feeling in the bottom of my stomach that he will do something, as you say, Kristen, the wildfires are too bad this year, or, something. There'll be some additional emergency that, we can't have any elections in the fall.
Well, that's amazing if that happens. And then of course, the argument they'd point to is, well, the next planned election is next year anyway, so why don't we just wait till then to render a verdict?
Why the rush?
Yeah, exactly. Why the rush?
Can I ask you?
Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask Katie what you think in terms of your people paying attention. You said it'll pick up. I mean, I'm imagining that the candidates, they have a huge interest in revving up the attention and so on. And they'll be planning campaigns and spending money and so on to get interest back. When do you think that's going to happen?
Right now, I don't know, because I don't think all of the people who are seriously considering running for governor are in the race yet.
Because often we hear about, if in a normal election year, there's a kind of truism. I don't know how true it is, but campaign people say, well, people don't most normal people, the people who aren't really following it closely, they don't really get engaged till kind of just after Labor Day is seen as the traditional kind of kickoff for the campaign season. You've got Labor Day, beginning of September, the election's first Tuesday in November. If that's the model here, then I suppose we've got I don't know. It depends if it is November or October, because I think.
So I'm just thinking, as you asked the question, Steve, maybe that's the point. Since no one knows the date, then nobody can really time their campaign appropriately and figure out what's the beginning, middle, and end. It keeps everybody, really unstable so that nobody can run an effective campaign. I wonder if that's part of the strategy as well. It's smart.
It's a good point.
Well, look, I've loved this conversation, Katie. I was going to ask you to kind of weigh in on the strengths and weaknesses of some of the candidates, but I don't want to open that whole thing right now because we're out of time. But I'd love to do it with you another time.
Sure.
Perhaps when we have more in the race, or more declared candidates. I'm sure you're right that there's more to come. And just what a fantastic and important conversation about the water issue. Wow, that was I learned such a lot from that, and really appreciate you being here to tell us about that. Katie, I hope you'll come back. And in the meantime, everybody go to could you just remind us the exact
CaliforniaGlobe.com, and we're on Twitter and Facebook and putting out a lot of stories every day.
Fantastic. Well, we'll be watching and hopefully see you very soon, and hope you can join us very soon on another episode of California Rebel Base.